Welcome to Cyberfusion's podcast, Life's a Breach, episode 8. Today, we're talking about DORA and cyber threat intelligence. So we're drilling down into some of the specifics of DORA, specifically around cyber threat intelligence. Happy to be joined today by Lewis Henderson. Welcome, Lewis. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
So I'm bowing down to your expertise today. I want to drill into a bit more about, what CTI means within the framework of DORA, and hopefully, you can assist me with some of that. So from what I've read, the role of threat intelligence within DORA compliance, we're looking at proactive risk management, operational resilience, and instant reporting. What are the main provisions within DORA around threat intelligence?
Well, interestingly, I think it doesn't specifically call threat intelligence out. I think what the way it's sort of written, and certainly the analysis that we've done, reading through the actual legislation itself as much as a team can, is really sort of picking out which bits relate to threat intelligence. So there's certainly sort of provisions in there, and I think just picking out, one of the ones you mentioned about like incident reporting. And what we started to see, and this wasn't even reading between the lines, it was really interesting to see this written out in legislation for the first time, was how specific they're being about what needs to be included in the incident reports and the timescales and therefore the time pressure that puts an organization under to be able to, comply with the actual regulation itself as well. So good example around this is threat actor attribution. So upon breach or discovery of a breach, the clock starts ticking. There's basically three key areas which are time sensitive that an organization has to sort of respond by. So certainly within one business day, they have to, both report the breach and provide some sort of fairly basic sort of, basic sort of details around that. There's an interim sort of middle sort of area as well, but then ultimately there's a final report that has to be delivered within 1 month of that first notification as well. And one of the things that we noticed that's in the regulation itself, and this is very, very specific around a handful of articles. I think we're talking Article 19 and sort of 20, talking about like threat actor attribution. So, and the reason why we see that as a bit of a challenge essentially is that, upon sort of breach discovery kicks off a whole bunch of like incident response processes, but organizations are fairly limited by the fact that all the logs, all the information, all their sort of data, all their telemetry is going to really, start and stop at their sort of gateway. They're aware that they've been breached. Data may not have been stolen, credentials may not have been stolen sort of yet. But that's sort of in progress. So therefore it starts this progress of now like driving towards like threat actor attribution. So for example, one of the challenges we see is how they're going to achieve that in a timely fashion, comply with the regulation and actually understand, who was responsible for that sort of breach when they don't have that external visibility. So that's one of the sort of key challenges. And I think the other interesting element is that a lot of organizations would probably have a consulting partner on hand. They may pay, retainers and things like that. I know there's been sort of discussions around that, but even that outsourcing of the attribution itself may not help you sort of reach that sort of time limit. So it's for the first time we've seen, legislation get extremely specific around something like this as well. So really from our perspective, we want to see organizations adopt a bit more of a proactive approach in terms of, really analyzing what types of threat intelligence are they ingesting. We're not just talking threat feeds and we're not just talking like finished threat intel reports, for example, really analyzing like, does that threat intelligence feed, help you understand, all of the TTPs that relate to that attack? Does it help you understand, and will you get to that place of understanding, who that threat actor was and meeting that compliance measure for that threat actor attribution? So yeah, we've done a lot sort of analyzing, going through the legislation, picking it apart a bit, but it was really interesting to see, like, for the first time that we've seen, like, specific articles that are getting very, very prescribed around certain things that need to be in these reports. So the first wave is within 1 business day. There's an interim sort of measure, and then within that first month sort of period, that's when they have to have all of this information delivered again back and reported and submitted. So there's a lot of challenges, a lot of, I think we'd like to sort of refer to it as opportunity. I think, seeing the legislation in the light that it was really written in, it's really trying to, improve, security defenses and get organizations from being reacting to incidents to more sort of proactive. But I think it does come with some caveat that they have to have some level of visibility of what's going on, external to their networks.
Yeah. And I think, given the experience we've both had in the industry, selling multitude of technologies, even one of the questions we ask a lot of customers now is, how would you know if you're being breached right now? And, if I said that more than 50% would say we don't, it's like to suddenly go to this framework where within 3 to 6 months, you've got to not only tell them you've been breached within a day and have all the right, follow-on reports. That's some legwork.
Definitely, I think we can say there is a maturity curve, and we're fortunate enough because we work with some extremely competent and elite teams, and yeah, in terms of their level of maturity, of course, they're well funded, they're well orchestrated, well organized. But we could even the legislation and the audience this impacts sort of being financial. You'd be extremely surprised where a lot of banks appear on this maturity curve. So I think, in terms of readiness, I think even though we are now post DORA, it's now live. I think organizations are going to be playing a little bit of sort of catch up. I think a lot of CISOs are going to be quite surprised when they do get into the weeds, like we have done with the actual legislation, maybe how, measuring the maturity of their teams, they might find that they're a little bit sort of behind the curve on some of these areas. And also if they do go out to their existing sort of suppliers, they might find them lacking, and you can't outsource ownership of aligning with this regulation, right? That's no longer an excuse. So really we're on this sort of mission to help organizations understand that there is answers to these sort of challenges. There are sources out there, and certainly we're one of them that provide external visibility in the terms of external telemetry, helping them understand, what goes on sort of beyond their infrastructure in as near real time as sort of possible. And that was the other elements that we saw in the legislation as well, just how much emphasis is put on being proactive, but also specifically mentioning things in real time as well. Real time monitoring of third parties. Yeah, this is no longer vague. This is really, really specific. And organizations really need to start to assess all of their the teams, the processes, the procedures, all of the existing suppliers through this lens.
Yeah, and how does third party risk management? How does Team Cymru approach that?
Yeah, so I mean, choose your statistic, but I mean, I think on average it's something like 70 to 80% of successful breaches, from an attacker's perspective, are undertaken through a supply chain partner to then hit their target. So I think that DORA legislation really talks about getting real-time eyes on your supply chain, on not just your ICT supply chain, but on general sort of supply chain. The onus is definitely on the organization themselves to be able to monitor third parties. So Team Cymru is all about what goes on out on across the internet. All of this external telemetry. And I think we could sort of, summarize it with saying, look, anything, good, bad, and ugly, we will have some sort of insight into it. I think on, to put some, metrics around that, every day we're ingesting about 300 billion IP to IP communications. Some of our services are, again, analyzing, categorizing upwards of 30 million IP addresses, again, on a daily basis. And these are new IP addresses that are sort of appearing on the internet. And supporting that, we also have, in-house, we're detonating, upwards of nearly 1 million malware samples sort of every day, either on bare metal virtual machines and things like that as well. So really what the value that we've got to offer is that condensing and flattening that timescale from being aware of something, ahead of time, but so being proactive as opposed to, just being incident response and just reacting to sort of specific events. And interesting, I think that's where this legislation is trying to drive organizations, is going from being reactive and looking inside your network. So threat hunting initiatives are typically, acting like you've been breached, already, relying on your internal sort of telemetry, at least some dedicated teams to sort of go and find, signals of potential breach. Where we've always been, and I think where this legislation is driving organizations to go beyond your borders, start to ingest external telemetry, start to get a trusted sort of reliable source like Team Cymru in terms of like ingesting that and becoming aware of, third-party risks before they manifest. And the legislation again speaks to that as well. It's making sure that you've got, you are monitoring your supply chain partners that are critical to your lifeblood for signs that they've been compromised. Good news is, again, we've got, case studies that people can sort of read up on our website. Our customer success stories actually speak to these exact scenarios as well, where, you can monitor ransomware victims, for example, remotely, do it that passively, on the understanding that if your peers are being, breached, you're likely to be next. So, if we scribe that line between, knowing that and sort of DORA, all of the TTPs that you can learn from an attack on someone else, one of your peer groups, for example, a bank gets breached, you'd be able to sort of assess that sort of remotely. You'll be able to, again, understand a little bit more about the threat actor and also apply that to your existing defenses as well. So really, this is, these are the kind of, shifts in how to use threat intelligence to be proactive.
Yeah. And I think it's long overdue, I think for too many years, people have just had an inwards facing view of security.
Yeah.
And, the external attack surface just has been, not going to say neglected, but it's been a minor part of their strategy. Whereas now it's almost the tables have turned and it's a major part.
Exactly. It's an interesting point. I mean, attack surface itself, I think that's definitely a technology and a phrase that went from almost came out of nowhere sort of 4 years ago, became immediately commoditized. And then people have sort of got quite confused over it. And I think there's over 100 vendors now that really have tried to attach some level of capability to that. So I think, the market's got very, very sort of confused about that. So what we've done is we've sort of started to fuse our cyber threat intelligence sort of data with capabilities that enable organizations to just understand their own ecosystem, as in what do they own out on the internet, and also what's connected to that as well. So really, it's about getting, again, that specificity that DORA does talk about, understanding your external assets and also understanding your third-party landscape, and then assessing risks that reside around that to then actually do something around. That's where a lot of our sort of focus has been building up. So yeah, we've definitely got new products, new capabilities that are rolling out across 2025. One to watch really, because again, I think when we map what the full DORA requirements are that we see around sort of threat intelligence, we'll have that sort of full complement as the year goes on.
Yeah, and in terms of Team Cymru and the data you see out there and the information, if somebody's not using, you, what else would they do to get that level of information, or are they just completely blind?
I wouldn't say they're completely blind. I think they're reliant on, again, organizations they know what they know, right? So they know they can buy in various threat feeds, and each one of those could fulfill a very specific sort of capability or an area of interest or a specific sort of data set, for example. And also they're relying on their consulting partners to do things like finished threat intelligence. But as we know, threat feeds are they can create a lot of noise. That's certainly one of the challenges that we see out there as well. So more threat feeds doesn't necessarily mean more visibility. It actually creates more noise for SOCs, very specifically. So the way that we approach that is helping organizations actually cut out the noise. So again, because we've got internet-wide visibility, we can help sort of distinguish between, genuine threats, tangible threats, and what isn't. So for example, like scanners are something that teams like literally automatically want to sort of filter out and then start their investigation and research sort of based on our data. and then shifting the other way away from sort of threat feeds to finished threat intelligence. I think that is an area where if organizations don't have that capability, they outsource. But finished threat intelligence reports, I mean, very, very costly, but also they can take, 3 to 6 months to actually create a finished threat intel report that's all bound up and then delivered to sort of CISO. And certainly the conversations that I've had with the analysts that are at the sharp end, that information they can't actually act on. What do you do with a report that's 6 months old when the threat actor has actually moved their infrastructure maybe 4 times during that period?
It's almost a point in time report, unfortunately, that's 3 to 6 months out of date.
Absolutely. And I think, again, how do we scribe that between that being a challenge and what's in the DORA regulation is, again, DORA is mandating that you have to have all of this information buttoned up. You need to be aware of these things within a very short,
almost dynamically on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely, yeah. So on one hand, I know it's going to be challenging. I know CISOs are going to be looking at this as it is a significant shift. But I think in terms of, we look at the essence of what the legislation is actually trying to do. It's trying to shift from being reactive to proactive, and we see that as that's a great thing, and that's what we can get behind. I think it's in terms of how it benefits the actual teams themselves. So relying on fewer threat sources, threat data, relying on less actually helps the team be more efficient. So rather than sifting through all that noise, they're getting really, really focused, very specific about threats that impact them. And also threats that are impacting them now and risks that are impacting them now. I think that's the difference. So it's really shifting that needle and helping them sort of comply with some of these really specific DORA requirements.
And I know there'll be a lot of customers out there that already have current threat intelligence platforms, but a lot of those actually bring risks, and a lot of the existing ones, it's not going to be enough. So what are the challenges for some of the existing tips?
Yeah, I think it's the maybe the tip itself, but also the data that they're putting into that as well. So I think the old adage is rubbish in, rubbish out. So yeah, I think one of the missions that we're on is that how do we enable teams to use less sources, be more efficient, cut the noise out. And I think that also is where we come into it. So we don't just have the size and the scale and what we call our data ocean. I mean, Pure Signal is our threat intelligence sort of data ocean. It's great that it's got that scale, but it wouldn't be useful if it wasn't consumable, and if it wasn't, if you weren't able to, filter sort of noise out. So I think in terms of teams' goals should be relying on less threat feeds. Definitely. I mean, there's options out there where they don't need 15 to 20. And I think I heard a story recently. Some organization was trying to ingest 70 threat feeds. I mean, that's just you're going to be sort of clouding up and clogging up pretty much every process possible. Each one of those, again, needs independent, development time to ingest. I mean, analysts are not developers. They're reliant on other teams and maybe other people in the organization to actually sort of, get these things sort of operational. So there's definitely a challenge around that. So yeah, consolidating sort of threat feeds, ensuring the visibility that these feeds are giving you actually does align with sort of DORA. So unless it's real time, unless it's able to filter noise out, unless it's going to be very specific on threats that are impacting you, these are the types of decisions that are going to need to be made, especially for the teams that are centered around sort of CTI, for sure. Okay,
and we've discussed previously the fact that DORA is aimed at FSI. Mm-hmm. What are some of the actionable steps for these entities in the finance world that they should be looking at and taking?
When you look at sort of legislation, it's people, policy, process, sort of procedure. There's no one bank and one organization that's going to be cookie cutter sort of at all. So I really think, I think the approach that we're doing, what's actionable is we've created. And speaking specifically to your partners, so we've created a DORA partner pack, and what that's going to help partners do is take the cyber threat intelligence messaging I mean, we're, it's coming from a sort of a Team Cymru sort of perspective, but enable, both sales teams and marketing teams to go and start to have conversations with their customers and with their finance customers sort of specifically. So first and foremost, we want to enable partners to be able to start these discussions. So we have a partner pack that has everything from, messaging decks, sales guides, marketing guides, all this sort of good stuff that's needed for kind of sort of quick start. To have those starter conversations. And what those starter conversations are really around is like, okay, so you've got specific articles in DORA that we start to list and mention. We're enabling organizations to understand, well, what are the specifics in that? So for example, I mentioned like threat actor attribution. We mentioned TTPs, like all of these specifics, helping organizations understand, well, are we going to comply or not? Are we going to be able to comply within the time period? Things that are actionable are starting to compare and contrast like what you have today with these requirements, and just doing that whole gap analysis in terms of meeting the requirements, and that's assessing everything from your current threat feeds through to your tip. Are these tools going to help you, or are they going to work against you with the regulation?
Okay, that's brilliant. And we were saying earlier, obviously everything we do is very much partner and channel focused. DORA is on everyone's lips right now. And our retailers are going to be asking the question, they're going to get asked the question. So they need to know themselves and have that knowledge, but they also need to know who they can turn to. So it's great knowing that, Team Cymru have got those reports and assessments ready, and you can bring that expertise to them to go and help their customers.
Yeah, definitely. So on our website, we've got our partner portal. We're going to put all of our, the DORA sort of partner quick start pack up there. And like I said, it covers everything from, the first questions that a sales team should be asking. It helps also, with teams understand like what are the qualifying questions. There's email templates in there. There's even like sales training deck. There's all sorts of stuff that we've done. But again, being sort of Team Cymru, this is all specific around cyber threat intelligence. So we're not asking partners to go out there and certainly talk about DORA holistically, because I mean, it's such a huge topic and it's way too much. So yeah, I think us being very specific and having an area of focus is going to help partners at least kick things off. And there are genuine opportunities there. I think that's it. From the place that we're coming from is also where the legislation is coming from. Trying to get organizations move from a reactive state to a proactive state. There's plenty of opportunities for partners out there to have these conversations. To position, technology solutions that are going to generate new revenue. I think that's why we're all here, obviously, and add consulting services on top as well. So from our perspective, I think we've got a really good value proposition for your partners. Yeah,
and even though it's effectively come into force a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, I don't think the fact everyone's talking about it. I think there's probably still quite a runway where people are going to be working on this for, the next 12 months plus. So from a channel perspective, again, it's not like I've missed it. It was 2 weeks ago. There is a huge amount of work to be done that is literally at the starting point. So the opportunity is still there for people to come and speak to Team Cymru and get assistance in going out and start helping and selling those services to their customers.
Absolutely. I think, if we sort of look retrospectively back at like EU GDPR, for example, I mean, there's plenty of organizations that were not aligning on day one because, again, it was new, but also there was a grace period as well. On the flip side, the first few victims were made examples of. There is a grace period, but I would really say like for organizations that have to comply, the clock is ticking. But know that there are, again, there's plenty of partners out there that are going to be on hand to help guide them through these complexities. We've tried to be very, very specific in our area of focus and try to help and support where we can. So we're looking forward to helping sort of partners engage and take the DORA message out there and help people comply. So.
Fantastic. And I guess, one sort of final question, looking at putting DORA on its head and not looking at the financial risks and penalties, as an organization, if they adopt the strategy and they bring resiliency in, what are the efficiency gains? There's got to be some real positive gains for an organization if they align to this. So, what have you seen and what's there from an efficiency standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I can draw on, pretty much like all our existing customers. So we do, we do engage with them. We ask them, sometimes some what sound like sort of fairly probing questions, but ultimately we want to know, are they getting value out of our products and are they getting value out of the services that we're offering? So, DORA or not, going from ingesting reactive threat intelligence, reactive threat feeds operating reactive state to going to a proactive state. We're talking a 30% sort of reduction in incident response times, and in addition to that, the amount of incidents themselves that actually get through to sort of resolution increases, because we're able to help organizations like filter out the noise, get extremely specific about threats that are impacting them and them right now. We're helping them get more granular and more specific and more accurate. So there's a lot more precision that comes out of using our data. So yeah, the faster and the speeding up the incident response process is like a massive gain. And also, in addition to that, they're just generally dealing with like less noise in general. These are significant gains for the teams that are at the coalface here. Yeah,
no, as you say, those sort of figures are significant gains. So closing thoughts. If you had to give a core message about DORA and how you guys can help, what would that be?
I think it's really, there's no escaping it really, is there? So it's definitely time to do gap analysis on your current threat intelligence sources, your threat intelligence team, and your threat intelligence sort of suppliers. And really, in the advice that we've given is like, take what we've written, start to get very specific around that and use that as a comparison between where you are and where you need to be. And then start to sort of apply budget and resources to be able to get there.
Yeah, and I think from the material I've read on your partner portal, it certainly comes across that you're trying to push the message that DORA is not compliance. It's a resiliency strategy that needs to be ongoing and not just a tick box exercise. And
absolutely, yeah. And I think we sort of mentioned at the beginning is saying you can't sort of pass the buck along.
No, not on this one.
The ownership, you cannot outsource the ownership. Absolutely, down to organizations sort of comply. So yeah, again, we're here to help. We're here to inform and ultimately, provide the right kind of solutions, the right kind of products that are going to help these organizations, comply, and hopefully take the burden off some of these teams.
One of the things I really like about some of the requirements of DORA, I've always been a huge advocate of collaboration, and I don't think in the UK or the EU it's done enough. I've been out to Israel. And they have massive organizations there, and it's all about collaboration, information sharing, and collectively they try to stop the threat. Whereas I think we're still far behind that, and we're very much siloed. So, when we look at collaborative defense, how does that fall within DORA and you, again, what you guys can do for it?
In DORA itself, there is Article 45 that specifically talks about, collaborative defense, but also starts to scribe out some specifics in that as well. And one of those is, sharing like adversary infrastructure information. And one of the use cases that certainly our customers have when they use Team Cymru is exactly this. So what our data enables organizations to do, because again, it's all about, going beyond the borders and getting eyes on adversaries. So we're enabling organizations to monitor threat actors and monitor their infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily mean they've attacked them just yet, but once you latch onto them, that's something that you can continuously monitor.
Okay.
As they change and shift their infrastructure. But really importantly, and these have come through our customer case studies, which I think I always quite like talking about these because they're completely authentic. Is the way that some of our user analysts collaborate is that they'll actually see one of their peers either being, probed, as in they're at the reconnaissance stage if we use the MITRE model, or their infrastructure, one of their peers, industry peers, could be another bank, for example, they've noticed that their infrastructure is actually beaconing back out to like C2 infrastructure. So that's an indication that things have progressed from an attacker's perspective. You're far along the MITRE model sort of at that point. You're nearly on actions on objectives.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the fact that this legislation and DORA specifically, starts to call out, use cases that we've got in our customer case studies in terms of like analysts making discoveries about their peers, literally picking the phone up and saying, were you aware this was going on, guys?
Yeah.
And yeah, so we've got, UK banks, US banks, people can go to our website, sort of read up our case studies about this, but actually it's a common thread across all of our case studies. Analysts themselves are just generally really collaborative sort of people. They actually like to help. They like to help others, and that kind of shines through. But it's great to see that this is now bolstered by the actual, legislation itself. So I think a lot of it was going on. A lot of it is going on anyway. But I think what it really does now is surface the fact that it's to the betterment of everyone. It's to the betterment of the industry, and we've already seen it sort of taking place and happening anyway. So we're sort of pleased to see that.
Well, it's given the official push that it actually needed to.
Definitely.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Thanks, Lewis. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much for joining us. If you have any questions around cyber threat intelligence and how it relates to DORA or generally just cyber threat intelligence, please reach out to myself or Lewis at Team Cymru, and we'll be happy to assist. Catch up with you guys soon. Thank you.